Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. As you can see, I've got a guest today. Angie Jones is a long time. Oh, shoot, I gotta hold on. I gotta cut off YouTube here.
Oh,
um, Angie Jones is a longtime activist in Australia. Feminist and all around left wing activist. I believe you were in the Green Party at one point, were you, Angie? Or
I used to vote
you?
for the Greens.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, I was actually a Green Party candidate. Back in the
Ooh.
dark ages, 2002. Um, yeah, and I got to introduce Ralph Nader to the audience when he came to Bloomington for a campaign stop. That was quite
Interesting.
a
No, I was a member of the
cool
Labor
thing.
Party, which is our Democrats. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, they're not as bad as our Democrats.
no, we're not. We're heading that way, but we're not.
Yeah. So anyway, so you've been doing your social justice activism thing for decades now, and I guess
Mm.
you more recently, within the last few years, 5 years ago, something like that, became a vegan and an animal rights advocate.
No, I did all my animal rights advocacy back in my 20s, which is
Oh,
now
okay.
much to my horror 30 years ago.
Yeah,
I was a member of Animal Liberation, and we organised events, and we, did grassroots activism, like going out and standing between duck shooters and ducks and things like that. So yeah, I did
oh
most of
wow.
that when I was young, and then I took like 20 years out of activism,
Yeah,
apart from letter writing, to have a
yeah.
family. I've got 4 children, so raising
Right,
them
right.
has been my priority. And then
Yeah,
this gender thing came back, and all the skills that I developed, in my earlier life, I've brought back and began to use to fight this disgusting regressive ideology.
yeah, yeah. So you were doing all that other stuff, and we'll temporarily, let's fast forward to a few months ago in March. So you were doing the uh, activism, you against gender ideology and the invasion of women's spaces, and then you organized or were leading organizer of a demonstration there in Melbourne, near where you are, um, and well-known women's rights advocate in the UK, Kellie-Jay came out for that, and you had a big rally there. And then shortly after that, this lifelong progressive activists, namely you, is suddenly uh, in the front pages of the Australian media as a supposed Nazi
Yep.
because you were called that by a Liberal Party politician, all around scumbag named John Pizzuto, following that protest. So why don't we start with that? Yeah, could you fill us in on what all happened with that?
Yeah. Well, we here in Australia, we have laws comparable to Canada regarding gender identity, like children, um, having their puberty arrested, getting onto cross-sex hormones, and then having double mastectomies at 15. Kids can have full gender transition surgery at about 17 if their parents approve. Like, we have some of the most progressive laws around gender identity. We also have hate speech laws that prevent people from talking out about it. We have institutional capture because all public services have this diversity and inclusion stuff imposed that basically erases women, erases safeguarding for women and children, and promotes transgenderism as the most vulnerable minority. And employers, particularly public service employers, get a big diversity tick if they, are pro-trans in everything that they do. And we, as far as the media is concerned, it is entirely captured, and we experience nothing but pro-trans propaganda. So in Australia, you know, we have prominent academics and people like that speaking out about this issue and the dangers of, you know, puberty suppressants for children, and irreversible surgery, and also the imposition on women's rights particularly, and then also, you know, particularly lesbians' rights and gay men's right to have single-sex spaces too. So we're speaking out about that stuff and nobody's listening. People just ignore you. And so Kellie-Jay Keen announced in the... Yeah,
or they call you names and threaten you.
Yeah. Kellie-Jay Keen announced a world tour and we said, please come to Australia because our media is ignoring us. We're trying to bring these important issues to the fore. And she's like, yep, you know, and all the women here in Australia, you know, bought her merch to enable her to come out here. And she did a tour of the capital cities, which are all quite dispersed and they have a very different sort of political feeling in each city. Now, here in Melbourne, we're an angry, grumpy, you know, very, very urbanized city. And we were in the longest lockdowns for COVID of anywhere in the world. We also, you know, have a Nazi problem in that, you know, the far right have been able to use the obvious suppression of the working class and the poor. They've been able to abuse that to recruit here in Melbourne, because people who are frustrated with, you know, the way that the left has suddenly become fascistic, their only alternative is further to the right. So there's been, you know, this you know, battle almost that's been going on in an undercurrent, and women's rights have just been completely dismissed. You know, feminist issues completely dismissed, and the government's promoting the narrative that here in Australia, women and men are equal in every conceivable way, and there's nothing to worry about. Anyway, the trans thing brought all that to the fore when they introduced sex self-ID and transgender. And, you know, after lockdown, so many porn sick blokes discovered that they were transgender via the internet and came out as trans and went straight to get their new birth certificate where all safeguarding has been removed. And now a simple self-identity allows them into all women-only crisis services, sports, roles, whatever. And women just said enough. So Kellie-Jay said she'd come out here. We were like, thank God, because we're really struggling to you know, to make the public aware of what's actually happening here.
Right.
And we organised all the events, and you know, most of them went off fairly smoothly. There was a little bit of counter protesting, and the media narrative was quite negative, calling her an anti-trans activist and having right-wing views and making false associations based on a Wikipedia page that some trolls keep changing. You know, so if something positive goes up about Kellie-Jay Keen, the trolls make it something negative and try and link her to the far right.
Right. I should just interject a couple of things here for any listeners we have that aren't up to speed on what's going on with all this. First of all, you mentioned that girls can get mastectomy, you know, who think they're boys or want to be boys can get mastectomies at age 15. And a common response of the so-called trans rights activists is, well, that's not really happening. But you actually know somebody who had this done to her. So
I personally know a child who had that done to them. I know a gender non-conforming girl who came out as a lesbian in her early teens, that her mother took her to a gender clinic when she was 12 and her breasts were gone by the time she was 15. So it's, you know, I personally know a girl this happened to. I know all the details. It happens.
Yeah. And the other thing is, I guess we should just, you know, make explain real basically what the issue is here and what it isn't, because you and I and basically everyone who is on our side on this issue, the vast majority anyway, believe that trans identifying people, just like everyone else, you know, should have the right to not be harassed or be discriminated against in terms of housing and employment and so forth and so on. Not have any sort of violence or anything like that happen to them. But on the other hand, what the so-called trans rights movement is actually promoting has little to do with that. What they're promoting is, on the one hand, as you said, encouraging children who have dysphoria about their status as a boy or girl or whatever, to go on this medicalized path of treating their gender dysphoria, supposedly treating it through getting puberty blockers to arrest their development as pubertal male or female, and then from there to get on cross-sex hormones and maybe at some point have surgeries to alter their physical appearance. And then on the other hand, there's the issue of people who identify as trans, particularly, not only, but particularly males, not only claiming to be women or girls, but actually entering female-only spaces, which is problematic for all sorts of reasons. Not only because there's the possibility of assault, because males are bigger and stronger and so forth, and 99% of sexual assaults are committed by males, but also it's just a privacy issue. I don't want a girl walking into a locker room and seeing me naked, and most women don't want men doing that.
Nope.
Regardless of how they identify. So, and then there's the sports issue where in the vast majority of in many sports males physical advantages of on average being bigger and stronger give them an unfair advantage in sports. And maybe if we have time, we could also touch on, there's been also recently been a controversy, which I recently did a video on about the sport, or whatever you want to call it, of chess, where there's obviously no physical advantage of males over females, but there's another issue of just the long-standing the fact that we've lived forever in a patriarchal society means that there are certain things that girls and women are discouraged from doing, and so in this case there are way fewer females than males who play chess, and so even some prominent like former world champion female chess players have said, look, it's great that we have all these open events, but we also need female-only events to encourage girls and women to take up the sport. So anyway, just wanted to throw all that background in. Okay, so back to the rally.
Yes. So before the rally, we were made aware that anti-fascists, so-called anti-fascists, and trans rights activists were going to be counter-protesting the rally. So we were in contact with police ahead of the event, and we explained that, because the anti-fascists were putting posters all over the city and posting all over social media that they were going to fight the Nazis and fight the right, and because they were actually targeting women and claiming Kellie-Jay was far right, we assumed that the right might actually turn up. Because when you put out a challenge like that to those sort of men, historically they have turned up.
Right. So
they would if they didn't, they would be called cowards, because they were allowing women to be assaulted by trans rights activists and anti-fascists. So we assumed that if they did turn up, there'd be a fringe way nowhere near us. The police would deal with it, because we don't want Nazis anywhere near us, and we assumed that it would be a fight between anti-fascists and fascists, and that was it. So, we didn't, nobody was in contact with anyone. It was just a reasonable assumption for someone like myself, who is aware, who's been to anti-fascist protests that, it is actively anti-fascist, will assume, based on the past behaviour in Melbourne, that those drongos were going to turn up. So we turned up to the event. We were vastly outnumbered, which we expected, by not just trans rights activists and anti-fascists, but by violent, abusive men who were violently pushing against the police to attack us. So the police formed a human shield between us and these violent trans rights extremists and anti-fascists and the tag-alongs who just wanted an excuse to abuse women. There were plenty of those.
Yeah.
And so
you, as the marshals of the event, also formed a human shield to protect the speakers and audience.
Yeah, we had to. We were vastly outnumbered because women were afraid to attend our event, but also were afraid to be marshals because of the hostility from the other side. And they made it very clear before the event that they intended to cause violence because they were going to bash the fash, because they were going to silence, because they were the language they used to describe how they were going to turn up to the event was very violent. So women were afraid. So we only had like 10 or 12 marshals minding 300 women against 700 angry men. So it was a bizarre situation. There were a lot of police, but they weren't really prepared for the level of violence that would be directed towards the women. There were not enough police. They had police horses. They didn't have enough police horses. So the police were under-resourced.
Uh-oh, frozen. Not sure what happened.
I'm still here.
Yeah. So the police were under-resourced.
Yeah, they were under-resourced. So, and that, we had to perform a human shield around Kellie-Jay Keen and the speakers because infiltrators, because, we're basically a group of lefties, feminists, gay men, it was easy for the other side to infiltrate our event because we all look the same. And interestingly, there's no footage of our event in the media at all, because if you looked at it from the outside, it probably looked like a pride event. Like there were rainbow flags, there were suffragette flags. There was this, broad group, mostly women, a multicultural event. It was just like exactly what you would consider like a left-wing event, almost like the old International Women's Day marches before they were overtaken by men. And the anti-fascists looked like violent thug unionists. It was so surreal, the contrast. Anyway, we had to shield the speakers because the other side would infiltrate our event pretending to be an observer and then attack the microphone. And one of my dear young friends was knocked to the ground and knocked unconscious and was taken to the hospital. So in the fracas, and that fracas sort of made the news the next day. But on the day it was a tenuous situation because it very much looked like these violent men could break through the police line at any moment and attack us. And my job, while we had a human shield around their speakers, my job as one of the chief marshals was to walk along the perimeter and to raise the flag if someone broke through and went for the speakers. Because Kellie-Jay Keen, politician Moira Deeming and Catherine Deeves basically had a massive target on them. They were very brave for being there. And I actually had a man actually standing beside me who was actually keeping an eye on me because people were so concerned that I would have my head beaten in too. And in hindsight, I'm very grateful for him because, I'm very grateful that he volunteered his time as a very fit bloke to protect me because I insisted I didn't need it. But in hindsight, I probably did. I was definitely being targeted by these extremists.
Yeah. And just to go into a little detail. So what happened in that incident that you mentioned was that one of the trans rights activists somehow got through, I don't know, maybe when they let the fascists come in, but or whenever, and it happened at roughly the same time that the cops let the fascists in, and he went up on stage and he was dressed, in female attire, but in any case, he, shoved the speaker aside and grabbed the mic, and in the process knocked your friend down. So anyway.
Yeah. And while that was happening, another group because there was this big, massive crowd of hundreds of socialists, anti-fascists, whatever. And then all of a sudden, another massive crowd of red flag waving socialists came from another direction. So the police were concentrated on one side of the event, keeping the anti-fascists at bay. And then all of a sudden there was this other group of anti-fascists coming from the other side. And what I didn't know was that 12 men basically jumped out of a bush wearing all black. And these men, who we initially saw them and thought they were Antifa because they were wearing black and face masks and looked like anti-fascists. These men jumped out of a bush and took a stand against these socialists, and they were goddamn the neo-Nazis. And 12 of them stood in the middle of the road and faced off against these men that were just about to push through the police line. So there were 12 neo-Nazis, another 200 trans rights extremists and socialists and anti-fascists. And I literally, in the video, you can see that the red flag socialists shit their pants when they saw these 12 Nazis out on the road. Like, we didn't know any of this was happening. We were like a couple of 100 meters away from this while it was happening. But what happened then was the police, who were already overstretched on the far corner, could see a massive riot was just about to break out. And if that riot broke out, the anti-fascists would swarm the women. So they made an executive decision, a very, very hasty one, to close the police line around the event on that side. And the Nazis saw an opportunity as the police swarmed around this massive group of socialists, a socialist in inverted commas, they're not real socialists. And the Nazis came inside the boundary that was protecting the event. Now, the women weren't the only people in that area. There was another group of anti-vaccine activists who had their own protests going on in there, but they were in with the women because,
the cookers, as you call them.
Cookers, they call them cooks because they're cooking up a conspiracy. So they were also in with us. So the footage that's emerged of apparently the TERFs talking to the Nazis were actually the anti-vax kind of conspiracy people, because they're politically, they don't care who they talk to. Whereas us feminists, we're mostly lefties, and we're terrified of Nazis, in the sense that we don't want anything to do with them, But the Nazis didn't even look at us. They didn't acknowledge us. They weren't there to defend us. They wanted nothing to do with us. They were way over 100 meters on the other side. We had our backs to them. And I only found out that they were there because the police came running over, and I said, oh, shit, is that Antifa? And they said, no. And then I sent a friend over to find out who they were, and my friend came back and said, they're Nazis. And I thought, how the hell did they get in here? How the hell did they get through? But when I saw the footage afterwards, I could see that the police let them in because they would either let them in or they'd let hundreds of angry, violent men swarm a stage of women and potentially kill someone. So the police had to make that decision. Now, unfortunately, we said, get those men out of here. You don't realise what this is going to do to us, blah, blah, blah. And the police marched these neo-Nazis away from the women and right past the trans rights extremists. And, the Nazis, unbeknown to us, had unfurled a banner on the other side of the event that said, destroy pedo freaks. And, of course, all the trans rights extremists thought that banner meant them. And, when they marched the Nazis out, the neo-Nazis, they did the old salute past the trans rights activists. And the media, who had paid no attention to our event, all of a sudden suddenly swarmed out and took photos of these neo-Nazis and filmed everything. But there's zero footage of our event. There's zero footage, apart from amateur footage, of why the police decided to let the Nazis in. And, there's zero footage of the violence that was being committed by the anti-fascists and the socialists. And, but there was heaps of footage of the Nazis. So they left. We weren't even sure. It seemed so unreal and so theatrical. We weren't even sure they were actual neo-Nazis because it looked like a theatre troupe. It was just the most surreal experience, because who would ever imagine the way that it all happens? My experience of neo-Nazis when I've protested against them in the past they were like just a bunch of half-wit thugs. These men were very organized. Their appearance wasn't what you would normally expect. Like it was just so surreal. Anyway, the police, because of the neo-Nazis, were able to wander off down the street. No trans rights activists followed them, but because that had agitated the trans rights extremists so much, and they were afraid for the safety of the women, we had to close our event early, and we needed to be guarded by police in order to get away from our own event. So, because it was
I didn't realize
that
the event. I didn't realize that I read that article that somebody wrote about you a few days ago, and that was the first time I realized that you guys had to close the event early because of the threatening nature of the situation.
Yeah, they were punching police horses. They were literally punching under the guts of police horses to get to us, while neo-Nazis walked off down the street.
Yeah, definitely no animal rights activists in that crowd.
No. So, and then we all thought, considering the threats that were made beforehand, afterwards we considered it a successful event. We'd had a few hundred women turn up. Everyone got a chance to speak. All the speakers were absolutely brilliant. Like they were spot on. Like some of the best speakers I've ever heard. And I'm not biased just because I'm from Melbourne, but some of the best speakers I've heard were at our event, and I was so immensely proud of all the marshals, all of the women who attended. And I was really grateful to Kellie-Jay that we felt that we might actually get a few people maybe pay attention to us because of that event. So we were very grateful. But we had no way of predicting what would happen afterwards.
Right. Yeah. It's just, what a shit show it became. I'm not sure. Let's see. Why don't we talk about how, what got you into all of this? What piqued you, as they say in the UK. So you're doing your thing on various issues, environmental activism or feminism or what have you, and then. What happened that led you to go, hey, wait a minute, this is an issue I need to really pay a lot of attention to?
Well, I've always been, I worked in a gay bar in the 80s during AIDS, right? I've always been around gender non-conforming people. I shared a house with two trans identifying people. One was a drag queen. So I've understood always that transvestites and transsexuals were on the fringe of the gay scene because they were gender non-conforming men, and gay men took pity on them. And a lot of the transsexuals were actually gay men who were so uncomfortable in their femininity that they decided to transition, and that relieved the dysphoria they felt about being effeminate men, right? So that was a given. They were, and there's heterosexual transvestites that used to, be barflies at the gay venues. They were sad, pervy men, and they were allowed to come too because the LGBT community is a very accepting community because they know what it's like to be ostracized. So I've always been around trans people. My dad was a musician. My mum's. A friend of my mum's was a gay man, but he had a girlfriend because he was in the closet, and that was a trans woman, so it was not something abnormal to me that someone was trans. And I've always had compassion for those people, and 9 times out of 10 they'd had the transvestites wouldn't be interrupting women, and the ones who would use female only services were incredibly rare. And they had also had full reassignment surgery. So they might use a female change room or might use...
Okay. We're waiting for Angie to come back. There she is.
Satellite. So, they might use a female toilet or change room. And you wouldn't notice because they present they're so far down the transition journey that they present as female, you probably wouldn't even notice. So, my experience of trans people had been that they were very, very, very rare. that they were no imposition and no threat to natal women. They never invaded our breastfeeding, rape crisis, domestic violence services. They wouldn't dream of it because they were mostly homosexual men. You know,
Right.
they wouldn't dream of doing that.
Yeah.
So anyway, 20 years passes, don't think that much about trans people, which is my luxury because I was raising kids out in the suburbs.
Yeah.
But I think lesbians, had more of an experience of trans-identifying people trying to invade their spaces, which I wasn't privy to. And circa about just before Bruce Jenner came out of the closet, probably about, was it 2015? I get a phone call from my mother-in-law, my mother-in-law from my eldest.
Oh. Your mother-in-law from your eldest. Yeah. Come on back, Angie. There you are.
Yeah, so 2015, I get a phone call from my mother-in-law to say that she and her partner of 20 years had separated. And I was like, what? And she said he's run away with everything to become a woman. And
Jesus.
I'm like, what? Like, what are you talking about? Because this is a straight man, I'm like, what are you talking about? Anyway, she told me that, he'd been watching too much porn and that he'd always had a thing for her undies and whatever, all the cliches,
Yeah.
And I couldn't reconcile that in my head because I'm like, but he's straight. He's not a transvestite. What the hell is he? And that's when I learned about autogynephiles. And I learned that about, that some men find it sexually arousing to inhabit a female persona, like a sex, it's like for gratification, basically.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely disgusted, particularly at the thought of it being my father-in-law.
Yeah.
And he took basically took all her superannuation. He defrauded her through their small business. He basically had been squirreling away for years to defraud his own partner in order to run away and have gender reassignment.
Wow.
And as soon as I realized what an autogynephile was, that was it. I thought, I'm going to talk about this. And of course, before Bruce Jenner, nobody listened. Everyone's going, oh, what are you talking about? And then bang, Bruce Jenner comes out. And there it was. My father-in-law on the front of all these papers says, stunning and brave. And I'm like, nah, he's a porn sick freak, Yeah. And that was it. Like, I have never, ever, ever not been gender critical, like, because it's just so preposterous to pretend a man is a woman because he says he is. It's ridiculous. So I've been, I never had a peak moment, but the moment I decided to speak out about this publicly was because of Bruce Jenner. And then in 2017, we started hearing that our state government was going to introduce sex self-ID legislation, which removed the requirement for surgery for men to get a female birth certificate. And we said no.
Right. So basically that's just anyone who wants to can just claim to be, the other sex, and that's like legally like sanctioned.
And you don't need a medical professional to sign off on it. No psychologist, psychiatrist, or medical doctor. All you need is someone to say that you've lived as the opposite sex, whatever that means.
Yeah.
For a period of time, and then they tick a box and you get your birth certificate. And that completely, that is just you've adopted a completely new identity because your sex marker has changed and you're using a different name. And of course, that is an open invitation for the wrong kinds of men.
Right.
We've had one of our most prominent serial killers, Paul Denyer, goes by Paul Denyer. He's trying to get out of prison at the moment, so he's dropped his trans persona. But he was claiming a trans identity for 10 years and spent millions of dollars of government money trying to fight to get gender transition in surgery in prison. So, we have plenty of proof that, the worst kind of men see it as an opportunity to exploit, to gain access to women.
Yeah. And like you, I had I have a similar background as far as GLBT stuff. My dad was actually gay and wound up dying of AIDS, actually, unfortunately.
Oh
And
no, sorry to
yeah,
hear.
yeah, and um, one of my best friends was gay, and so on and so forth. I did some, like in the '90s when I was teaching psychology at various universities. I invited gay speakers to class to speak out about that issue, and then in the early 2000s, there was a guy who owned a local bicycle shop, John Smith, who became Judy Smith, and he seemed like a pretty harmless person. So I thought nothing of it. Like my attitude, much as yours, was just well, just like gay and lesbian and bi people should have their right to not be discriminated against. Same thing for trans people, and that was that. And it wasn't until much later that I realized, oh, there's this other element of the trans communities, males who are very determined for whatever reason, whether it's because it gets them off or what
Yeah.
have you, to invade women's spaces, and then there was a whole issue of the physical damage associated with so-called transitioning, and so I very much changed my tune. But anyway, continue with what you were saying as far as what brought you on, got you.
Oh yeah, it was definitely the sex self ID. I couldn't stay quiet. I couldn't. I'm a mother of 3 daughters. I have 3 daughters and a son, and I could not stay quiet after having the thought that men like my porn sick father-in-law would have unfettered access to children. And at the same time, we'd also noticed some disturbing things, like our state government was removing all single-sex facilities, like single-sex hospital wards, single-sex toilets, single-sex change rooms, and that was impacting on girls and women. So we noticed that was happening too, and decided to speak up on that.
Yeah. And then in your own personal vocation, you came across that invasion of female spaces directly. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, I went. I've been involved in women's recovery services for decades. I first accessed them as a victim of domestic violence, as someone who, had to access a 12-step program. There's a whole bunch of reasons why I ended up in crisis services through lack of support from my social group and from my family. And so, the value of women mentoring other women and, the safety of female-only spaces is intrinsic to me. Like, I would not be here today if other women had loved me back to life when my privacy, safety, and dignity had been violated by men. So I cannot, I cannot begin. I was having a coughing fit. And then, so what was I talking about? I was talking about female-only spaces.
Yeah. So you were involved in a female rape crisis group, and then
I run a domestic support group for women who've experienced domestic violence. That's
domestic violence. Okay.
Yeah. So there's been, I have a background in that sort of stuff, and I was someone called me and said to come to this meeting because there was a woman who had been raped in the city in broad daylight, and she was incredibly distressed. And she was also coming down off drugs and alcohol because she'd been drug affected when it happened. And people asked me to come to this event on the other side of town. So I drove over there, and this was before the COVID lockdowns. So probably 2019, early 2020. Okay. And I went into this room with a whole bunch of, there's probably 15 women. And we were all there to support this woman who'd had this awful experience. And I noticed out of the corner of my eye in the back of the room was a man with a ponytail. a trans-identifying person. And I kind of felt alarm. I thought, oh, I hope she knows that he's here. And that was my only thought.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, everyone else in the room is female. You know, I trust that this woman knows that that's a man, because I could see it was a man. It was literally a man with a ponytail. But I knew it was a trans-identifying man because he had breasts. So, so I'm like, oh, I hope she realizes there's a man here, because it's a very obviously talking about something so deeply personal while you're coming down off drugs. Right. It's not something you'd normally talk about in front of a man you don't know. So, so we, the woman shared the experience of what had happened to her in her own words. Other women offered support, advice about what she should do now, how she should cope with her trauma, who she should speak to, gave her numbers, So it was basically just a typical format of a crisis service. Anyway, a lot of women piped up, and then they said, around the room, has anyone else got anything to add? And this voice came out, and it was a deep man's voice.
Yeah.
And this woman who had shared her rape story swung her head around like I've never seen before and just glared. She had not realized that was a man. And I saw the look on her face, because I was sitting on the other side of the room glaring at him. And I saw the look on her face, and I will never forget it. Like, I can't even remember what she looks like, but I will never forget the horror on her face when she heard his voice.
Yeah.
And you know what? I didn't say anything. I didn't say anything. Because nobody else did.
Yeah.
And I was in a room for the purpose of being supportive to a woman, and I didn't want to cause a scene.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's that's been a big problem that's allowed this wound to fester, so to speak.
And if you've ever observed me for 5 minutes, I'm not the sort that bites my tongue. And if I had my time over, I would have thrown him out myself.
Yeah.
But this was new territory. This was uncharted territory. And that woman never came back. She never contacted anyone that I know from that group, and she never came back.
Yeah, that's unfortunate.
I don't know what happened to her. And I live with that on my conscience. And that's when I went, stuff it. I'm going to get on Twitter, because Twitter is such a powerful medium for people who have controversial opinions that nobody else will listen to. And I thought, I'm going to start ranting on Twitter. And that was just before the Maya Forstater case and before the, TERF Twitter really took off. And I kind of accidentally timed it perfectly. And I started to raise my voice and tell these stories of where my life and other people's lives had been impacted by trans self.
Okay, trans self, and I assume you were going to say
self-identifying men. Yes, self-identifying men. It has a huge impact. I mean, as a man, if you walk into a room full of women, it's awkward. You're like, oh, talking about women's stuff, I'm out of here. It's just an awkward experience. And that's even when you're in there for not dodgy reasons. But the presence of a man in a group of women has a serious effect.
Yeah.
Everyone knows that.
Yeah. Yeah, especially when it's a sensitive issue. It's
when you're talking about male violence against women, it is a sensitive issue. Yeah. So I'm still traumatized by that. Just like that day changed me. I just became enraged, and I had that moment where I thought, why isn't anyone else saying anything? And I went round after the meeting and said, why didn't you say anything? And they said, well, why didn't you? And we all said, none of us want him here. No, nobody wanted him there.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, I imagine that's the same thing that happens in a lot of those situations. Like, so a male invades the female bathroom. Nobody, wants him there, but they're afraid to say anything.
And all it takes is one woman to say, well, I invited him.
Yeah.
And that's it.
True
And
too.
nobody says anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, well, what gives you the right to speak on my behalf, or him being in here? Yeah, and I've been in conversations where women were talking about this sort of thing, but they knew who I was. I was invited there. This is a stranger just showing up out of the blue. So, totally different situation.
Mm.
But I mean, so like this is just totally obvious when you think about it, and you're not brainwashed, that there are reasons why women and girls should have female only spaces.
Yeah.
Just privacy issues and safety and all of it.
Yep.
And yet, we get called all kinds of names when we take this position. Even people who agree with us on 99% of other issues,
Yep.
just personally attack and snub us when we speak out about this.
I think we have an advantage as vegans because we understand cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
Like, I think that's a huge part of it. Like, we can understand because, like, I'm a vegan for ethical reasons.
Yeah.
I love animals, so I don't eat them. And I have friends who love their pets more, treat their pets better than I treat my kids, right? All my pets, like their pets are their children.
Yeah.
And like their chicken is their child, and yet they eat chicken. And it's like, how can you do that?
I know.
I've never ever been able to portray myself like that. But it's, for a lot of people, it's part of the human condition that they can literally think something's wrong and still do it.
Yeah. There's a social psychologist, Melanie Joy. I'm a social psychologist as well, but anyway, she talks about how there's just this massive propaganda campaign by animal agribusiness that portrays, and just our culture in general portrays eating animals as normal, natural, and necessary, which it's none of those. Well, I guess it's normal in the sense that it's societally normative, but it's really none of those things. But oh no, oh there you are. But it's, I mean, I remember when I was a kid, going fishing with my dad, and it just didn't even faze me that there's these fish flopping around in the back of the boat dying, and
I used
thought
to
nothing
kill
of
them.
it.
I used to get the knife and then stab them and cut their heads off and gut them. I did all that.
Yeah. And it's just, and then you come home and you love your dog or your cat or whatever, and it's just a bizarre disconnect.
It is.
But the funny thing is that in all our years of activism, both you and I have been activists for decades. And I don't know how long it's been for you, but it's been 26 years for me since I became a vegan. And so we've had to put up with the fact that people who we agree with on 99% of other issues, don't care about animals unless it's their own pet. And we don't cancel them. So, why do we get canceled for adopting this position that women should have their own spaces, and kids should who have gender dysphoria should be counseled, not have their breasts cut off or whatever. And we're ostracized for that, and so
we are.
But
I kind of like being a bit anti, like I think there's this sort of anarchist inside me who is anti-authoritarian and anti the status quo, because I don't, having the support of the government and the media is a red flag to me. Like, and corporates. If corporates and the media and the government all agree with me, then it's likely my politics are not healthy. And so I think I'm quite comfortable being the resistance.
Yeah.
Like,
or actually,
because I always have been.
I just happened to see you putting something on Twitter or X to that effect. You said big names and wealthy corporations uniting in support of anything used to be a big red flag to anyone on the left. Strangely, it's not now. It still is for actual lefties. But I mean, there's all kinds of issues where like all of the ruling class is in agreement. This one in particular is one where you've got a significant faction of the corporate establishment who are on our side, but you do have these conflicts and among powerful people where they don't all agree with each other and on everything, well, where was I going with this? Well, as you say, it's just like, okay, if one side of the this powerful group is promoting this, then maybe they're right, but you shouldn't at least ask questions. So like like the Democrats here in the States, we're right to, at least somewhat take, COVID seriously and, promote vaccines and all that. But, and, the conservatives were on the other side. But, regardless of who it is that's promoting whatever, if they're standing to make money from it, shouldn't you wonder, like, what's going on here? Why are they pushing this so hard?
And it just makes me laugh that these like so-called anarchist socialists, anti-fascists are on the side of like cops and the government, and it's just so pathetic. I don't know. I think too. I'm like, if someone had called me a Nazi when I was in my 20s or 30s, I probably would have killed myself. But I know myself now. I've stood by controversial opinions for 3 decades. I'm comfortable with who I am, and I know that I'm on the right side of history here. Like, there's nothing that they can say that is going to make me think a man is a woman, and I'm always going to think that it's reprehensible to think to give men open access to all women just because they say I am one. Like, they're never going to change my mind. And I find I'm really proud of the fact that I refuse to back down. Like they say that self-esteem comes from esteemable acts. And I think, standing up in the face of something that is clearly corrupt and oppressive, it's hard, but it helps build your character.
Definitely. Lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's pretty funny, like, because I sort of wonder how I got here, because I'm nobody, just a mum. I've been like, a little bit political, probably more than most. I am a leftist. I have been forever. Grew up in the trade unions with my dad, and and to find myself here, even speaking to your podcast about a political issue at this point in my life, and having the 2 most powerful politicians in the state find my words and my actions so frightening that they had to lie to defame my character and try and make me something that I'm not, that there's no evidence at all that I have links to the far right, apart from that I have a Nazi in court. And this tiny person, me, who's nobody, has had such a profound effect on these people is truly astonishing. And I can't help but laugh. I just think it's so ridiculous that I find myself here, that anyone even wants to talk to me about this. I'm a boring mum picking up after kids,
Yeah. But it's like, they're so desperate. It's like, it's so obvious that, You're none of those names that they call you, and I'm not. We both have a long track record of being, the exact opposite of anything associated with a right or whatever. And if you stoop to that level of calling people names where it's obvious that they don't fit the bill, I mean,
Yeah.
it really shows how bankrupt your position is.
Yeah. And the people calling me a Nazi, no, they know for a fact that I'm not. Some of the prominent anti-fascists that are calling me NAMS now contributed to my crowdfunder when I took an actual Nazi to court.
Wow.
So, and they've had to admit that they were associated with me. And it's like, oh no, she was an anti-fascist, but she suddenly turned far right. I mean, who possibly believes that? Who possibly believes it? That someone's gone to the, I've been in court for 5 years against a white supremacist. So I have all the proof in the world that I'm anti-fascist. And yet these idiot politicians and these so-called, anarchists and anti-fascists who agree with the idiot politicians are framing me as something I'm not, in spite of overwhelming evidence that I am the opposite. It's craziness.
Yeah. Well, I guess the teeny tiny little grain of truth that they didn't blow up into this big falsehood is that for the most part, people on the right are on, to some extent, at least on the same side as we are on this issue. And so, we talk to them and, go on whatever. I guess you've been on Sky News.
Yeah. If I waited for the left to platform me, I would die of old age. They're not going to.
Yeah.
So I go on these networks as a left-wing woman. I speak in a language that is understandable to left-wing people, and and I talk the talk. I was very inspired by Kara Dansky, actually, who's a left-wing radical feminist.
And Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, and she went on Tucker. Yeah.
Which, I mean, Tucker's actually pretty good on some issues. He's not
Andrew Tate.
Typical. Well, he's pretty bad on a lot of issues too. But I mean, he's like, anti-war in a lot of respects, and there's some positions that
a lot of left-wing people. A lot of left-wing people. All the left-wing people that agree with us, they're voiceless. They don't speak up because they're going to be cancelled and lose their jobs and whatever. But I think people from all walks of life agree that this is wrong, and only the right are willing to talk about it.
Yeah, it's very strange. I was looking at some opinion polls recently, and something like 95% of people they polled, cutting across all demographics, at the very least say there should be female-only bathrooms, even if they think that there should also be gender-neutral bathrooms, and even if they're among those, I would suspect a minority of women who are okay with males who say they're women being in the bathroom with them. They still say, well, it should still be a right for women to have female-only spaces. It's like almost a unanimous consensus. And this very, very loud fringe who happens to have the backing of at least the liberal wing of the political establishment is trying to portray us as extremists or far right or whatever. And it's just like, look at the polls, look at what people actually think about this.
See, I can't believe anyone thinks that all it takes is for a man to become a woman is to declare that they are a woman.
Yeah. Well,
and they believe the lie that he's always been that way. Like we're talking about domestic violence perps. We're talking about men, someone like Bruce Jenner, whose whole athletic career was based on his physical body. Like, and these idiots are like, I can't believe people are that dumb.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I guess there are some who believe their own lies, but I can't imagine that there aren't at least quite a few who recite the mantra, trans women are women, who, maybe realize that that isn't literally true. So
I think they know. I think the vast majority of the activists are men's rights activists, because they've gone pretty quiet since this. Remember, the men's rights activists were over there, over on the right, going on about feminists. And while there still is a degree of that in the right-wing commentators, people like Matt Walsh and whatever, I think, the broader men's rights activists have gone quiet because the young men have all joined the trans rights thing, because it gives them an acceptable excuse to abuse women and to, to disrespect our boundaries.
Yeah. I mean, it's just, I go on Twitter or X or whatever and see, how they interact with people. And, I mean, it's social media is that way in general. People just kind of, throw all social norms about how to interact with people out the window. But, it's especially bad with this movement. It's like, they don't treat anybody with respect whatsoever who doesn't agree with them.
See, I don't say anything on social media that I wouldn't say to somebody's face, but I will say a lot of controversial things to someone's face. But I don't sit and insult people unless they insult me. Like, I'm not going to call someone an idiot unless they behave like one. So, I think, I think the people who have the most success on social media aren't the ones that sit there abusing people. I think it's people who just, that voice uncomfortable opinions.
Yeah. True.
I wish more people would speak up. I really do. I think if this war would be won if more people, particularly from the left, would speak up.
Yeah. I mean, we've got the numbers on our side. So, as Richard Nixon said, the silent majority. But what do you think it's going to take for that to happen? Or do you think it is starting to happen?
I think it's starting to happen. Last night on Australian television, they did a story about detransitioners and transition regret, and tied that in with childhood medical transition. And it was on a mainstream, news channel. And the TRAs have been incredibly quiet this morning. Like, I think a lot of people have been fed the narrative from our national broadcaster that transition is rare and it's easy, and it's very, like, there's very few kids are having it, and there's a really rigorous safeguarding process, which is all lies. They lied to the public, and I think a lot of people believe that. And then last night, for the first time ever, they heard the other story where they had a detransitioners talking about the mistakes that they've made and the impact it's had on their lives. And I think as a society, we've all sort of gone, oh my goodness, because the trans rights extremists are losing their mind about it, saying it's all lies. But the evidence is there. There are people who go through this process, and it was not the right thing for them. And they are raising flags to the process being bad. We're also having medical professionals finally coming out and saying, this is a human rights abuse. This is, this is, wrong. It's the biggest medical scandal of our time. So I think peak trans is certainly here, and the house of cards, which is gender ideology, is buckling. However, it's being propped up by corporates and governments. But our biggest proponent of this ideology, the guy who put us in the harshest lockdowns ever, and who also lied to say that women's rights activists were linked to neo-Nazis, he is about to resign. And I suspect it's because of political scandals that are brewing, where he's, spent too much money, or just, so I think
you're talking about John Pesutto?
No, Daniel Andrews, the other. So Pesutto is the opposition leader, and Andrews is our state leader and the biggest trans rights activist ever.
Yeah.
So when he goes, I think that's like pulling out the foundations, because he's the one propping up our gender clinic. He's the one arranging for the propaganda that is being spread to the public. He's the one who's, raising the trans flag outside City Hall the 2 days after our event where the Nazis turned up. It's once he goes, I think what's happening in gender clinics is going to start to come out, because then they'll be able to scapegoat him because he's no longer the premier of the state. So I think it's a long process, but I think things, sanity will prevail there. I think it would be wrong to fully deny people who believe that they are transgender medical care, but I think we go back to mental health support, because we don't have a mental health system here in Victoria. If I was, at all, we don't have one. If you have a mental health problem and you're reliant on the public health service, there is a month's waiting list. Our suicide rates are climbing. Nobody can afford psychotherapy. So we fix that problem, and then some of the gender stuff will be fixed. But, it's very easy to just throw money at gender and say, transition will fix everything. And aren't we wonderful for what we've done for these kids? While people who don't identify as trans are really suffering. It's all going to be revealed.
Yeah, but I guess the question is, will the funding be there to give these gender dysphoric kids what they need?
No. And there's no funding for domestic violence services either, even though we're in a domestic violence epidemic, because all the services are closing because they're forcing us to admit men. Like, our state is broke. That's on the public record. COVID is what broke us. And there aren't the funds. So what has to happen now is grassroots organisations have to form, and that's what we're doing. We are picking up the pieces. People who have been impacted by gender ideology are creating organisations which will pick up the pieces for the damage that the government has done to these people.
Yeah. Well, here it's even worse. Not only is all our infrastructure falling apart, but they couldn't even properly give aid to people who suffered from natural disasters like the wildfires in Hawaii, because they're too busy sending the money to Ukraine. Like, we're funding their whole government as well as their military. It's
unbelievable. Insane. Like, I think we're very sheltered from what's actually going on in the US. Like, we don't see much of it in the media here.
Yeah.
The poverty and but we're becoming like you. Like, I think because all these neoliberal governments are all got the same formula. Like, 10 years ago, it was affordable for a woman to stay home and dad to work, but now we're both working. Now it's a given that single mothers will have to go back to work earlier just to live. So we're becoming and our medical services are going up. They're removing a lot of the sort of public services, and so we're becoming a more Americanized society, and we're still pretending that we're like Britain, and we're not. We're becoming like America, and it's quite frightening.
Britain went down the tubes.
They went down too in a different way. Yeah. So
I guess their national health service is still okay, but they've like neoliberalism has taken over the Western world, fortunately, there seems to be a counterweight to that, because the leaders of the West are so fucking arrogant that they just bite off more than they can chew. So the U.S. Imposes sanctions on every country that sneezes the wrong way or whatever, or freezes their assets or whatever, and all these countries are going, hey, wait a minute, we thought you were our friend, maybe we should ally with China and Russia instead. And so that's what they're doing. And so our hubris is going to be the downfall of this neoliberal empire, a lot sooner than would have otherwise been the case. So I guess there's a silver lining there. But in the meantime, those of us who live in these countries are likely to suffer a lot. So.
Well, I know this is a controversial take, but I remember after 9/11, and I read Bin Laden's manifesto, a translation of it, and a lot of the things that he predicted have actually happened, which is really freaky, like the decay of Western civilization, and things like that. And it's really interesting to learn about that stuff back in the day, and to have studied the projected outcome of capitalism back when I was doing history in high school, and and politics, and to actually be living in that now is just surreal. It's really surreal to me and all this stuff was avoidable, all of it.
Yeah. Well, it's just striking to me how the U.S. has kind of turned on its own allies. So they sabotage Germany's energy supply. So, blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline and saying, oh, Russia blew out their own pipeline, as if that's at all believable. But
No.
you know, so Europe is going to go down the tubes because they don't have cheap energy anymore, and it's
No.
all self-inflicted or
Well, we're
U.S.
sending all ours
inflicted.
overseas. We're a very resource-rich nation, but they're banning gas in houses now, gas heating, like gas
Yeah.
fires and stuff, gas connections. They're
Uh-huh.
banning it, and
Mm.
yeah. So like we're a resource-rich country, and we're exporting everything, and of course
Mm.
charging more for what we have remaining here. Sending all the good stuff
Mm.
overseas, sending all the good trees to be pulped into paper, and keeping the scraps for ourselves and charging ridiculously high prices for it. Same with oil. Like we've got our own oil supply, but all ours is being sent overseas. So,
Yeah,
we're
well,
impoverishing ourselves.
yeah, it's like
It's crazy. But,
acting like
and
a
this is
third
it.
world country.
Yeah, and this gender stuff is just a distraction. Let's like, oh, look at these marginalized people and what good things we're
Yeah,
doing for them. It's just a distraction from cost of living and all the other things that are going wrong. And they're like,
yeah,
look at the rainbow over there.
yeah. It's I mean, maybe we'll find out someday from some latter day Julian Assange
Well,
or WikiLeaks that
Australia,
this was all
we
a plot to divide us. And oops, looks like you're frozen again. Can you hear me? Okay, you're back.
The most terrifying thing for me is already we're having our government is censoring our social media here in
Yeah,
Australia.
same
Like
here.
people that I know personally are having their accounts restricted because of content that they're posting that the government doesn't agree with. So,
Yeah,
and we're having more and more, freedom of expression stamping rules coming in, and the government is overreaching more into people's privacy. So
yeah,
I guarantee when the hate speech legislation comes in, there'll be attempts to shut down my Twitter account, and I will possibly have the police knocking on my door because a trans rights extremist has made a complaint
Jesus.
about my thoughts or my
Yeah,
expression of them. So,
yeah,
that to me is a very pressing thing. And that legislation will come through just like sex self-ID came through. They'll pretend that they're having a consultation process, but they won't. They'll just impose it on us. So,
yeah,
all the Australians may suddenly disappear.
yeah. Well, yeah. This guy. I mean, I don't really know him personally, but I know of him and watch his YouTube channel sometimes. Jackson Hinkle. He spends a lot of time talking about the Ukraine conflict, and you know, I don't, I disagree with him on a lot of other issues, but on this issue, he's dead on, which means he's very critical of, the Ukrainian government and, our Western support for them. And so his YouTube channel was demonetized like a year
Oh,
ago.
wow. Yep.
Um, and he's lost his Twitter account several times, and he's been put on the kill list that the Ukrainian government has of people who,
Wow.
yeah. If in case anybody doesn't know, the Ukrainian government actually has, or close associates to the Ukrainian government anyway, have this list of people they want to kill because they're outspoken critics of what Ukraine is doing, and NATO Western backing for this war. And it turns out I forget now exactly how he found out, but it turns out that his that YouTube demonetized him at the behest of the Ukrainian government.
Wow.
So the
Yep.
Ukrainian government is actually like influencing social media corporations to do their bidding.
Yeah, I wonder how much Elon Musk will fall. Like, and he's already under pressure from the Australian government, and I really wonder if he cares enough about places like here to do anything to try and stop it, like to try and help, even if they do shut us down, that he can somehow provide a voice for us. I don't know.
Yeah.
We're just
Yeah, I
considered
don't know.
so insignificant, Australia, and this is the thing that I value about Kellie-Jay Keen. She thought that if she could conquer Australia, then she could conquer the world. I'm gonna have another coffee fit. And so she realised the importance of Australia as as a practice for bigger places. Because if we fall to ideologies or to whatever, then anyone can, because we are supposed to be a free and democratic society here in Australia. We are supposed to be. So if something bad happens to us, that impacts the whole world.
Interesting. Well, I mean, led by her, things really seem to be moving in a better direction in the UK. So
yeah, well, I it was a big ideological sort of gamble for me to back Kellie-Jay because of the apparent people pretending that she was with the far right. I knew as a left-wing woman that I would be ridiculed by my own side, even women who are gender critical, and that has actually happened. But I believe the gamble paid off. I've paid a huge personal price for it. So has Moira Deeming. So has Kellie-Jay herself, because of the backlash that the politicians caused, like the incitement of violence against us from the politicians. That has had a personal cost, but I have no regrets. I think if I had my time over, I'd do it again. So it was necessary to rip the scab off this. Yeah,
but yeah, you have paid a price. It's I mean, you said you have you had to get some therapy and so forth for all that you've been through.
Yeah. Well, when your local community reads the national newspaper or sees on the news that you're a Nazi or associate of Nazis, and your daughter comes home from school and says, such and such can't come to our house anymore, but she can go to Dad's. 2 days after the event. That's something that deeply affected me. And I also had my ex-partner try and weaponize the abuse that I was subjected to, saying that it was putting our children at risk. So, when as their mother, that I'm being abused and told to kill myself, and said that, them saying that I'm not safe to walk the streets, then I, as their dad was concerned for the kids, as I would be if it was on him. So this has impacted me very personally. And people don't see that side. They see this big, tough activists out there not giving a shit. And that is true. However, there's this other personal cost that they don't see, because they will weaponize it.
Right. Yeah. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't, as far as
that's right.
That goes.
Yeah. That's the universal experience of being a woman.
Imagine.
A woman with an opinion. It was funny. There was a local media outlet ended their segment with one of my tweets, and the host said, and we'll give the last word to Angie Jones. And my dad's been dead for 10 years and my mum 20 years. And I could hear them saying, "You've always got to have the last word." And I could just hear their voices, and I was like, yay. And I was really, really sad, that they never saw this person. They saw the person who, I was never as comfortable in my own skin as I am now. And I think it's really sad that my parents are not here to see me standing up for people the way. I think they'd be proud of me, I really do. Dad is a crusty old unionist, I think he'd be very proud that I'm making a stand for genuinely disadvantaged people against predatory men.
Yeah, for sure. So let's see, what is it, like 11:30 in the morning there?
Yeah, I'm gonna need to go soon. I've got things to do.
Yeah. Well, any let's see. Oh God, we didn't really talk about your podcast, did we?
My
maybe
podcast.
You could say a bit about that.
Turf Talk Down Under, it's called. And it was just myself and my fellow TERF Stasia, and we were frustrated that we have no representation in the media. So we said, look, let's just put up a YouTube channel and we'll just talk to our mates about TERF stuff, about what's happening in gender critical circles, and we'll interview people to talk about, what's happening here in Australia, because all the news was from overseas and we wanted to have an Australia specific focus. And we thought it'd be 10 or 20 viewers or subscribers, and we'd be talking amongst ourselves. Basically, nobody would watch it. And then after a few months, I started getting inbox messages from politicians, journalists, people in the medical with a medical background, psychologists, psychiatrists, teachers. I started getting all these messages on Twitter from people that watched our dodgy channel. And it was really overwhelming because we're just a bunch of bums. We had no idea what we're doing. You know, I've got no technical skill. And then I spoke to a journalist about one of the issues, and she said, "Oh, we had your channel up in the war room of, yes, one of the country's major newspapers, and we were discussing whether we could platform you, and we decided not to because you're too controversial." And I'm just sitting there going, oh my God, you know, we really are beginning to get some reach. Now we've only got, 3,000 subscribers over a couple of years, which is a lot. Yeah, but these platforms, you can have someone with the best content that'll have 150 subscribers, and someone who puts rubbish out who has tens of thousands. So don't take it personally.
Or millions.
But we've been shocked at how much our channel's been appreciated, the distance that it travels, the feedback we've got. We've been shocked at the caliber of some of the guests we've had, because talking to us is like social suicide. So, and it's been great. And it's like, I don't think about, when I'm doing an interview like this, like with my own channel, I'm not thinking about the people out there. I just pretend they're not there, and I'm having a conversation with the host. Yeah. And it's been a really good experience for me personally to be able to do that, to be more comfortable in my arguments and my ability to express myself about controversial issues. And Turf Talk Down Under is going from strength to strength. And it's like, log in, we have a lot of lesbians and represented on our channel, because they don't have a platform anymore, because all the the LGBTQI plus media is so geared towards trans. Right. So there's a lot of women who tell their stories on our platform, and I'm really honored to give them that opportunity. And it's also fun. Like, we have a laugh, like we talk about some really serious issues, but we also find the humor in it, because it's really absurd. I'm 53 years old. I've got a YouTube channel. I mean, my kids think it's the lamest thing ever. I think it's ridiculous. And it is. And the thing is, it is. No, it's not. Yeah. Oh, your mum's going. I'm going to speak at the Parliament House, Federal Parliament House next week. Not in Parliament, but in a room in the building at the invitation of a federal politician. And my kids are going, what? And the reason I'm going there is not any of the wonderful things that I've done in my life, or any of the interesting things, or any of the stories that I have to tell, or any of the activism I've been involved with. The reason I've been invited there is because I've been demonized for not believing that a man can turn into a woman. Like, it's ridiculous. Yeah. It's ridiculous.
It is. Yeah.
And it's a weird irony, because as someone who's always been a bit of someone who likes to be a little bit out there and weird, this was not on my bingo card. Like, I never imagined that I would become a public figure on this issue, because who could ever imagine that this was ever going to be an issue? It's insane. Yeah. And who would ever, anyone who knows me would go, how can this be the voice of reason and sanity? Like, this woman, I wouldn't put her up as a poster girl for sane and reasonable, and yet here she is representing common sense.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, I guess what counts as common sense, there seems to be kind of a low bar for that.
It is these days. But look, but all us people who like, we've all been able to find each other through social media, and the support of people like you, in times where I felt really overwhelmed, and I'm socially isolated because I'm a mum and I live on a farm, and and most of my friends work, and I've still got young kids. So, I've become socially isolated. But when I'm having days where I'm thinking, am I really on the right side of history? Because we all have doubts. Has it been worth it being demonized and had my life's work destroyed by powerful politicians? And then I think of the connections that I've made over this process, and it's all been worth it. I have support from all over the world. I have people that think exactly the same way I do about this, and that is powerful.
Yeah, it is. Well, everybody, check out Angie's channel. I guess you guys try to talk to somebody about once a week, something like that.
Yeah, I try. I'm a bit slack at the moment, but Yeah, and we've because most people that talk out on this issue are anonymous. Like most people who care strongly about this issue are still anonymous because of all people losing their jobs and stuff. So we've kind of been through all the out turfs, and it's like, please come on my channel. I don't like harassing people. And we've had people who've agreed with public profile who've agreed to come on the channel and then pulled out at the last minute because they're afraid of the backlash.
Oh,
So, I try and put
change.
out an interview, but, we're kind of running low on guests at the moment.
Yeah.
And I can't just talk to the camera like you can. I can't do
it. Well, maybe you should invite some people on from over here or something. Or
yeah. But
UK
as you found out today, my unreliable internet is a barrier.
Well, it worked out. Hopefully people will watch this. But well, everybody, we're gonna call it a day here so Angie can get to work. But please check out our channel, Turf Talk Down Under. It's right there on YouTube. And
I've got a link in my Twitter bio.
Twitter also, just at Angie Jones on Twitter. So everybody, please check out Angie's content. I have great conversations about this issue, and I've certainly learned a lot from listening to them and their guests. Thanks so much for coming on, Angie.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much for your support from afar. It's been great.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to end the broadcast now. Bye, everybody.